Hey everybody, how's it going? Bacon here. And as I'm getting close to the end of Final Fantasy 16, I thought that it would be a good time to start to hear people's opinion about the game. Um, because I still haven't finished the game, I would still avoid reviews that talk about like uh, spoilers and stuff. But aside from the spoilery stuff, the reviews that are spoiler free, those are the one that I'm going to listen to. And once I'll finish the story, which I'm very close to, then I would also probably start to watch the ones that have spoilers in them as well. All right, so let's see. Final Fantasy thoughts. We have a lot of stuff in here, so it's very hard to decide. But I think that if there is one person that I would trust a review from, it will be Quazii. I hope I pronounced his name correctly. It's a little bit hard for me to see, but we'll see about that, alright? So, let's see his review. That'll be a good one, I'm sure of it. I like that person.
So I've just beaten Final Fantasy 16 and man, this is the hardest review I ever have to make for a Final.
Alright. Oh. I hope that he is not the person who is going to move around. Is going to keep his camera in one place. Alright, let's see what he thinks.
So I've just beaten Final Fantasy 16 and man, this is the hardest review I ever have to make for a Final Fantasy game. And I think it's because it took me several days to accept and internalize certain hard truths that I need to come to terms with before I can stand in front of the camera to talk about this game. This game was not the perfect game that I imagined and built up in my head. I had very high expectations coming to this game because creative business unit.
You're saying this game was not perfect? As a person who have played quite a lot of games, I've never encountered a game that was perfect. Never. Games looks perfect until you actually play them. When you start playing them, the more time you spend playing a game, the more you notice those small little imperfections and stuff that you don't like. Yeah, so yeah, it makes sense. And the more and more time you spend with the game, the more imperfection you will find in it. I think that applies to everything in real life as well, not only games.
Naoki Yoshida was leading the production of the game, and it turns out this is probably the best flawed game I ever played in my life. But make no mistake about it, even
No. What did I wanted to say? If you're going to say anything about designs, you're getting banned, Amanda. So, be warned. You have been warned.
comes with its flaws, I would still recommend this game to anyone that is related or remotely interested in playing Final Fantasy. So after a few days of mulling over my feelings about the game, here is my unfiltered, honest opinion about the entire game.
Wait a second. All right. Here we go.
It is spoiler safe, and I'll make it a point to use only official footage released by Square Enix before the launch of the game, and where I use my own footage that I recorded for the game, it's only related to combat and it doesn't have any story spoilers. For the more spoilery stuff about the story, and I have a lot of thoughts about the story, and especially the ending, I'll leave it to a separate video down the line. Starting with the story, and no Final Fantasy review is ever complete without an in-depth discussion about the narrative. This has always been the spine of the franchise, riveting storytelling that is gripping, moving, inspirational.
Yo, talking about riveting stories, I think that Final Fantasy 16 has a very special place. I mean, like, I won't lie to you. My first Final Fantasy was I don't remember though. Was it 14 or was it 13? I don't remember which one I played first. I think it was 14, and then I decided to play 13 later on. and then I did 15, and then 16. No, after 15 I did 7, the original 7, and then I did the other 7 as well. Yeah, so I haven't played all like the Final Fantasy games, so I want to say it up front. But I can tell you that at least Final Fantasy 16, which is actually the first game I am ever going to do the whole side quests. I have done so many side quests in that game, and as a person who is relatively new to MMOs genre, I mean, like I've played quite a few of them recently. Some of the best in the genre, and the ones that are most highly praised, like for example, Nier Automata, Nier Replicant, yeah, Final Fantasy, and yeah, a couple of others. Um, I am not the type of person who tend to do side quests, but when it come to Final Fantasy 16, I decided to go all the way and actually do all the side quests, which is something that is very new to me. And I can tell you that not all the side quests are perfect, but there were some side quests who were beautifully crafted, and especially there were some, I don't know if I can call them arcs, some characters, some characters that are mostly appear in side quests. Their story get evolves, and they evolve as a person, and something happened to them, either good or bad, and it get tied to other characters in the story. So I had a lot of very heartwarming and very emotional quests that I have been to, that I have done, that are actually side quests. And I can tell you that I'm very proud of Square Enix. I don't know about older entries, but usually, in my experience, side quests tend to be a very how can I put it? Not well thought out kind of quest. I don't want to say all the quests, but usually they don't have deep story with characters. Usually it's like, go do this and go move this and go pick up this amount of stuff or go kill X amount of monsters. Usually it's not something very deep. And I won't say that the side quests ask you for some very audacious and like extreme stuff to do. They don't. But even though they don't, the stuff that you do influence some characters, and those characters evolve and change, and there is a whole story wrapped up around those side characters, side quests. I meant to say, that is very very beautiful, and actually gave me the feeling that I want to actually do the side quest, because I wanted to know what happened to that character.
With the potential to break you down into a pile of sobbing mess at certain times. Having
I
beaten
agree.
the game though, there is no doubt in my head that the main story is a standout feature of the game. The twist here though is that Final Fantasy 16 chose a very different approach to the narrative versus all the previous Final Fantasy numbered titles. 16 introduces a darker narrative, very similar to the style.
Oh my god, talking about dark narratives. This game added horrors. They added, you know, they had it like a thing that is very similar to like Game of Thrones. I think it was probably inspired by Game of Thrones, but Clive is actually a bastard, which, in my opinion, was something very cool to see in a game, and to see that the Queen actually despises Clive. The look in her eyes when she looks at him is such disgust. I wanted to punch her every time I saw her in that game. Like, don't mind the fact that she is such a fucking bitch. She is a fucking bitch who just, you know, does everything for herself. She doesn't care about other people. And even the people that she cares about, she looks at them as ladders to increase her success and to increase her ambitions. She's a very manipulative and evil, totally fucking evil character. And a bitch. Did I say she's a bitch? She's a fucking bitch. And yeah. Anyway, the way that she looks at Clive, dude, it makes my blood boils. It's fucking make my blood boils. Oh fuck, I've lost what we were talking about. Alright. Oh, about the fact that the story is riveting. The characters are amazing. And there are a lot of fucking points that will make you super emotional. My god.
Of Game of Thrones, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. And yeah, finally he said Game of Thrones, so I remember, yeah. And yeah, Clive was a child of a whore that the king slept with. I don't know if we will ever learn anything about it more than we did. But it's very easy to understand by the relationship with the queen to see how much he despises Clive. For the fact that the king decided to be with a whore. And yeah, talking about the dark and adult themes, there is what is her name? Benedicta. Trying to talk about it without spoiling too much, but if somebody is extremely worried about spoilers, then be warned. It's a little bit of spoilers, but just sprinkles. It's nothing very serious. But Benedicta, dude, she likes manipulating men. She lies with every person that has a lot of strength. Any opportunity that she gets to lie with somebody that has a strength or and can influence something bigger, she lies with him and make the man like fall for her. And then she uses it to gain power. She's a very tactical, manipulative girl. And she's a hot mama. Well, she's not really a mama, but damn, she's fucking hot. Yeah. How about Kupka? I can't say much about Kupka. Kupka is just a bonehead. He's like, I'm a monkey. I want to kill everybody who opposes me. Like this. Well, Kupka do behave the way he looks. So, like, he was made to be that no brains, all muscle type of guy. And actually, he is quite terrifying. So they did good with his character as well.
But with a distinct Final Fantasy touch. The game shifts its focus from the ruling class and brooding leaders to the warriors and individuals who exist beneath them. It dives into the dynamics of power, duty.
And here is, oh my god, no, I can't. I guess there will be a little bit of spoilers in this review. It's a little bit hard
The game shifts its focus
to
from
enjoy the
ruling class
game
and brooding leaders
without
to the
talking
warriors
about
and
Dion.
individuals who exist beneath them. It dives into the
Here it
dynamics.
is. Here it is. The prince. God damn. What a good character. Also, there aren't a lot of characters. There are a couple. But they're sprinkled here and there. And their personality is not that... not portrayed a lot during the game, like here and there. Oh, let me help you, I can help you, we can do stuff together and stuff like that. But there are a couple of characters who are really close to Clive or get close to Clive later on, and one of them is Dion. And I tip my head off to Square because when it comes to Dion, they decided to actually make Dion gay. And I think this is great. There is not a lot of good representation of gay characters in video games. I don't know a lot of video games. There are a couple, but really sprinkles. Usually video games try not to get into this kind of stuff. They try to make the game as clean as possible. But the fact that Square Enix could have gone the normal route of making the game very clean, so they won't get any flag from anybody, but they decided, you know what, we are going to make one of the coolest character in this game gay, and we're going to fucking show it. Although I do think that he doesn't get that much screen time. There is one scene, I think, that he is seen kissing with another dude who is his somebody who helps him, somebody in his chain of command who is very close to him, and yeah, it's very like you know it when you see them. You know that like they are into each other. So there is a scene of them kissing, but not. I'm trying to remember if there is a sex scene somewhere. I don't remember, but they try to keep it very light and clean. But actually, I can say that it's not only with them. There are quite a couple of sex scenes in this game, but they tend to be not very detailed. So, you know, the bodies are quite covered, or at least the nips and pubes are covered, and you just see the rest of the clothing. But they don't try to make it very I don't know what the right word for it. Maybe I'll say visceral. It's not very visceral. I'm talking about all the couples, straight and gay. It doesn't matter which couple. Yeah. So Square threaded on the dangerous boy, dangerous boys route with that game, entering element like slavery. Oh my god. The majority of this game is revolving around being a slave and other people around who are slaves. And especially in the beginning of the game, you see how the slaves are being treated, and this is crazy. It's really crazy. So slavery, there is. I don't know if there is more. I think Dion is the only gay character. Like he and of course is the other guy who is in love with him. So it's two. What else did we say? Sex. A lot of sex. And yeah, manipulation. Trying to think if there are anything else that I've missed. Might be. And my hair is really driving me crazy. It's really like a spring going up when it needs to be down. Anyway, yeah. I think I rumbled quite enough. Let's keep going. It's only 2 minutes.
Beauty and the struggles of the common people living under the oppressive rule of certain nations. The story successfully intertwines all these different perspectives, highlighting the utility and class structures within this world. The game also pays attention to the development of non-playable...
Oh! Well, we will get to that. I will see if he's going to talk about it. If he's not, then I will talk about it for sure.
Characters,
we'll get there.
Many of whom have unique traits and memorable moments, but alongside the darker approach towards narrative comes a more mature and adult approach to romantic relationships.
Yes.
Prior Final Fantasy numbered titles were never rated M for mature, and it always toed the line to keeping to what I can describe as sweet and respectful romances. 16's romantic relationships is generally adult with bed scenes, deep conversations of conflicting emotions, conversations around characters have their internal struggles and how they feel about their partners. All of which mirrors real life, where relationships are never straightforward, which I think it's a bold move and it makes sense given the demographic of Final Fantasy audience have aged over the many years. The story is mature and emotionally charged with intense scenes that fit seamlessly into the game's world. The lore and backstory of 16 are exceptionally well crafted. It offers a deep and meticulous written setting that will captivate players who take the time to explore and uncover its intricacies. The story is further accentuated by the voice artist performances in 16, both English and Japanese. Now, I played the English version, but I've heard the same high praises from my friends who played the JP version of the voice acting. The voice acting.
Dude, talking about the JP voice, when I started the game, I actually wanted to play the game in Japanese, only because this game was made in Japan by Japanese people. So the majority, I don't want to say everybody, some people do know, but the majority of people who worked on that game, they don't speak English. So I think that, and also the original script of the game, I saw a movie by the head of translation team at Square Enix, which is also, oh, his name is Koji. Koji is a fucking brilliant dude. I would totally want to be a friend with Koji. He is such an amazing dude. And especially in this game, they gave him like free hands to play around with the wording and the culture and everything and trying to mold that English version of the game. So the thing is that the script for the game was written in Japanese. And then it was handed over to Koji, and Koji had to turn it into English. Now, this Final Fantasy, unlike previous Final Fantasy, is focused, the lip syncing is focused on the English version of the game rather than the Japanese. So it feels like they tried their best to make this game feel as if it was written in English. Even though they tried to do their best, the game was not written in English. It was written in Japanese and then translated to English. Although Koji did an amazing job because he made changes to the English translation and they retranslated it into Japanese again. So the game was quite mixed. It wasn't like it made in Japanese and then you just make translation to English. No, it was made in Japanese, taken into English, and then was rewritten and then taken back into Japanese, and the Japanese was rewritten to match the English. So it was a very like intertwined relationship between the English and the Japanese version of the game. But anyway, the point that I wanted to say in the beginning is that even though this game did huge amount of work and advancement when it comes to the English, it still was written originally in Japanese. And this is something that I don't take lightly. Whenever a game is written in a language, I tend to love playing the game in the original language the game was made in. But when I booted the demo Final Fantasy 16, I tried to play in English. Sorry, my bad. I tried to play in Japanese, but I must say I must be honest. I couldn't stand the fact that the speaking did not match the lips. It turned me off so much because of how, like, I felt that usually either the lines in Japanese were longer or shorter than the English, and they really didn't match the mouth, and it really drove me mad. it felt like they sticked the Japanese on the characters, as if it wasn't made in Japanese. It didn't feel like it was made in Japanese. So, although I am sure that the voice actors in the Japanese version are great, I just couldn't handle it. I had to play it in English because it matched almost perfectly. There are some parts in when the characters are speaking, but the mouth doesn't open. So it's not like 100%, but it's like 98% of the time the mouth flaps match the speaking. And I must tell you, as a guy who heard Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV was made by the same team who made Final Fantasy XVI. It's Creative Business something 2, which is a very odd name to call yourself. Anyway, the team there, those are the same guys who made Final Fantasy XIV. And Final Fantasy XIV is a game that is very close to my heart. It's an amazing game. But Final Fantasy XIV, I heard the English dub of the game and it made me cringe like hell. It was horrible. The Japanese, though, was perfect. So I really enjoyed playing the game with the Japanese dub. And you could feel very, very clearly that the game was made in Japanese. The English dub and the translation was very, very bad. Even if the translation wasn't bad, the acting, the voice acting of the English cast was trash. I couldn't handle it. It was horrible. So anyway, what I wanted to say is that in Final Fantasy XIV, it was unbearable for me to play in English. But when it comes to Final Fantasy XVI, chef kiss. It was amazingly made, and I'm not sure, but maybe it has to do with how much freehand Koji had in the translation, and the fact that they had to put the translation back to the Japanese, so it's like the mix of going back and forth between English and Japanese. Maybe that created this very, very hybrid game that actually feels like it was meant to be played in English. English was thought of since the moment the game came to be. And it shows, you feel it.
This brings the characters to life with raw emotion and authenticity. The extensive recording process, which I believe spans over 4 years, allowed for the highest level of polish and for the voice actors to fully express themselves and deliver performances that resonates with players. The dialogue and voice acting contributes to deep emotional connections with players and really brings out the best of the narrative experience. I felt on the whole the story was amazing. I do have some stuff to nitpick regarding the ending, but I'll talk about that in a more spoilery video. But for now, I'd like to move on to combat. And we spoke a lot about this new direction that the story takes. It's dark and grim. But that's not the only thing that Square Enix is taking a fresh approach to. Combat in 16 is nothing like I've ever seen in a Final Fantasy title. Now, when it works amazingly well, showing me battle sequences that has easily topped my best gaming experiences in close to 30 years of playing video games since the Nintendo console. But just like Clive's double-edged sword, there are elements of the combat system that I felt could be better, and let me break it down for you. One of the significant...
That's actually a very, very interesting point. I really can't wait to hear what he has to say about the combat, but beforehand, I don't want to be influenced by what he says about the combat, so I'll say how I felt about the combat. So, I personally, before this game, I played Final Fantasy XIV, so I actually got into turn-based the opposite way. It's not that I grew up with a turn-based system. I barely, until recently, until I started to get into Final Fantasy and then Dragon Quest and other stuff like that, until then, I didn't have much experience with turn-based games. I think one of the games that I put the biggest amount of hours into that is turn-based is Persona 5, which I had a blast playing. I won't lie to you, in the beginning it was a little bit annoying for me to need to go through a menu and choose which attacks I'm going to attack with. So yeah, I grew up as a kid. Unfortunately, I wasn't that cultured of a kid, maybe you could say, or maybe I was a normal kid. I don't know. But you need to take into consideration the fact that when I was a kid, I was playing games in English, and English is not my mother tongue. I actually, my mother tongue is actually Hebrew. So when I played game, I had to mostly play games that were not too heavy on the language size, because if they were extremely heavy on the language side, then I would probably give up on playing them because there will be too much reading to do. So for me as a kid, the games that appealed to me the most were the games that were a little bit lighter on the English side. Not that I didn't read the English. I learned huge amount of English thanks to video games. The majority I was games influenced my levels of proficiency in English to such a high degree. I just can't thank games enough in that department. But anyway, when I started, especially when I was a small little child, like going and playing an MMO was too hard for me as far as English goes. Too much fucking reading. I would probably throw away the game. So when I was a kid, the first games that I used to play were platform games. Because platform games, you know, you jump, you hit, you climb on stuff, you fall from stuff. There is, yeah, it's quite easy when it comes to game mechanic. Relatively, game mechanics are quite simple. I used to play games like Sonic the Hedgehog, Rayman, and did I forget anybody? Don't know. I used to play a lot of other games, you know, like Harry Potter and what else? Oh, I played a little bit of Crash. Unfortunately, I didn't grow up with a PlayStation. I got into the PlayStation quite late when I was like 13 years old. But what did I wanted to say? Yeah, I forgot what I wanted to say. But the point is, so anyway, so I played a lot of platformers, and they were not very high on the English. So therefore, I didn't have a problem getting through the games and picking up my English level little bit by little. Yeah. So unfortunately, I got into the MMO land quite late, quite recently. And actually, I can say that Final Fantasy is one of my first MMOs. Shit, I got it wrong. I didn't want to say MMOs. Why did I say MMOs? I wanted to say RPG. Oh man, I said so many times MMOs when I wanted to say RPG. Sorry for that. I did. It was my first MMO was RuneScape. It's a completely different story, and I started to play RuneScape quite early. But what I want to say is RPGs. Oh man! I said MMOs instead of RPGs that whole time. Alright, so anyway. Yeah. Every time I said MMO, just replace it in your head with RPG, please. Yeah. So I got into RPGs quite recently, in the last couple of years, and Final Fantasy, especially 14, was one of my entrants and actually made me hungry to try older version of Final Fantasy. And the more I went down the rabbit hole, the more I started to get into the old. It's not old, but the turn-based fighting system. And I don't remember. Did I play Final Fantasy VII before or after Persona? I'm not sure actually, but I can tell when it comes to the amount of hours that I put it into a game, Persona 5 was my first turn-based game. And in the beginning, it was annoying. Like, I was very used to the fast pace as a person who like evolved from platformers to FPS. A little bit of touching MMOs here and there. And this time I really meant MMOs, no an RPG. Which was RuneScape, which has a huge part of my life put into it. And then, after shooters, then I started to get into other stuff. I started to become a little bit more professional. I don't know if professional is the right word, but actually starting to taste different type of genres of game and to step into uncharted territories. Yeah, Final Fantasy was an uncharted territory for me. And Persona was an uncharted territory for me. And I can tell you that I fell in love with Persona. Persona 5 was one of my favorite games for a while. And I just couldn't let go of the controller because of how much I enjoyed it. Yo, man, I drifted so fucking much. Anyway, let's recap. Let's get back. So what did I wanted to say is that I started playing fast-paced game like platformers, FPSs, and I'm quite late to the party playing RPGs, but I did play a little bit. Well, quite a lot of hours. But relatively to older people who probably have a lot of experience with RPGs, yeah, I grew into turn-based. And I have things that I love, and I have things that I hate about it, especially old turn-based. The newer ones are way easier for me, but the old ones were very hard for me to get into. But I think turn-based is fun. It is fun once you get to it. And Final Fantasy 7, for example, when I played, I really enjoyed the game. And it's turn-based. And when the Final Fantasy 16 came, it was quite the opposite. Quite the opposite of turn-based. The closest, I guess, and it makes sense, the closest the combat system Final Fantasy goes to is relative to Devil May Cry. And I have very little, unfortunately, I have very little experience with Devil May Cry. My first Devil May Cry was Devil May Cry 4 for the Xbox 360. And I really, really loved it at that time because it was back when I was very much into those kind of fast-paced game. I wasn't like I didn't love it to the point that I actually finished it. No, I don't know why, but I dropped it after a while of playing it. Unlike some other games, for example, Halo, which I played almost every Halo from beginning to end. And Half-Life as well. Yeah, so Devil May Cry didn't get that treatment from me. And then after I played the demo of Final Fantasy 16, I decided to try Devil May Cry 5. And I instantly saw how damn similar they are. And to be honest, if I had like they're so damn similar, and yeah, it makes sense because the creator of the combat system is the same guy who created Devil May Cry combat system. But 16 combat system, in my opinion, is much more fun than Devil May Cry. Personally, yeah, because it's very similar to Devil May Cry, but toned down just a little bit. I think that Devil May Cry is all about combos and killing monster in the most articulate way. And you have those bits and bolts in here in Final Fantasy 16 that you can do that as well, but it's not as much as pronounced. Although you have like star system that tells you, oh, you did this amount of damage, this is amazing and stuff like that, and like giving you like a good like a tap on the shoulder for doing a good job at how well you slew monsters. It's not as pronounced as in Devil May Cry with the rating system of the A, B, C, and the S and S, S, and S, 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 and stuff like that. You don't have that. The stars are much less pronounced. You notice them way less, and they play less of an important place in this game. But the thing that I think is the most similar about Final Fantasy 16 combat to Devil May Cry is the fact that a lot of the enemies are like punch bags. You need to hit those enemies so many times before they die. Although, the stronger you become, the less time it takes you to drain their HP pool. But I think that relatively, the majority of the enemies have quite a huge HP pool that you need to drain, which means a lot of button mashing. Yeah, the better you become, the less meshier it is, and the more planned it is. It actually becomes like, how do you say that? Like the buttons, like you become very strategized by the way that you press buttons. You do this, 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 and that in this order, and more planned. But even though like it's more planned, you do need to mash a lot of buttons in order to kill an enemy. And in the beginning, when I started to play the game, I really didn't like it, especially because I came from my previous experiences with Dark Souls games. Yeah, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, Sekiro, and Elden Ring. And these games influence the way that I look at combat. Hey, what's up? Thank you for coming to the stream. I used to be very, very focused on the story of the game. What it used to be the number one most important thing for me, the story of the game. But wait a second. Let me move this here. But after a while, because I experienced Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro, the importance that I put on combat really increased dramatically when I started to experience when you need to actually strategize and you actually need to. I feel like playing Dark Souls is like a slap in the face for the types of players who play Devil May Cry. Because Devil May Cry, and I can say Final Fantasy 16 as well, to some degree, are very, very lean and give you quite big, you yourself as a character have quite big HP pool. So once you get hit, there is a lot of room to maneuver and, to drink a potion or do something like that in order to restore your HP. So it's not a problem. Like, you can make a lot of mistakes before you die in a Final Fantasy 16 or in the Devil May Cry game. But when it comes to Dark Souls, boy, when you make a mistake, you don't only get a slap, you get a fucking punch in the face. They don't go easy on you. They teach you very, very quickly how much mistakes are going to sting. And I think that this is great because that forces you to either back down and cry and upload to YouTube a review about how much this game sucks, or do the opposite thing and think, what did I do wrong? What can I do better next time? And if you are from the second mindset, the type of person who actually learns from mistakes, but I think that video games are the medium that teaches you about you make a mistake, you try again, you get better. Or as they say, get good. Like, people who play video games and never want to die in the video games, why the hell do you play games? Go watch fucking movies. I think that games are made for you to learn lessons from mistakes. They are made as a place for you to make mistakes. They want you to make mistakes. That's why you have checkpoints and stuff like that in video games. They let you do stupid stuff and learn from it and become better. So, now I've lost track of what we were speaking about. So let me try to go back. So what was the point that I wanted to make? The point I wanted to make is that Dark Souls made me appreciate I can even call it art of teaching the player to be very thoughtful and it's hard to pronounce that word, methodical about the way they play game. They teach you from the beginning. As soon as you start the game, they already slap you in the face. You start, you go, oh boy, I'm going to kill some monster. I have a big sword, yay. Of course, you don't have a big sword when you start, but anyway. You go and you tap the monster and it doesn't do any damage, and then the monster comes and you, oh my god, I think I almost broke the microphone. Go like, and like smash you to pieces. And there you have it. This is the first lessons. This is the first lesson. You learn very quickly that you can't act stupid and rash in that game. And then you either cry like a baby or you just get up and try again. And you get slapped again and slapped again and slapped again. And you are starting to become more calculated whenever you fight the next time. So I think that although you do have, especially bosses, they require a lot of hits. They are hit sponges or HP. They have big HP pools. I feel like when you fight a boss in Dark Souls, it feels less like button smashing and more like a very calculated and orchestrated dance. I will put it like that. I think that becoming good at a Dark Soul game, Soulborn game, is like becoming good at dancing. You learn the other person way of dancing, how they move their legs, and you learn how not to step on their legs and move in the correct way. And I find this beautiful. And personally, although because of how accurate you need to be in a game like Dark Souls, sometimes I'm getting too tired of failing and I need some time out from the game before I go again. I prefer Dark Souls type of combat to DMC type of combat, which is also Final Fantasy 16 combat. But I'm not saying that I don't enjoy Final Fantasy combat. I do. It's a fun combat whenever you control it. But I still prefer the complexity and the delicacy of a very well planned game like Dark Souls, the way that you actually go about fighting an enemy. So yeah, that was a very, very long rant. Let's keep going, shall we?
Changes in 16 is the shift from the franchise traditional turn-based combat to a character action game style, similar to Devil May Cry or Bayonetta. This decision was met with skepticism by many before launch. And while I love the turn-based element that defined Final Fantasy in the era of Final Fantasy 1 to 10 during Sakaguchi-san's heydays, I was open to the idea of a change, especially since Yoshi P and Creative Business Unit 3 was at the helm of the title. And if you are a viewer of this channel,
Creative
you know
Business
I've been a fan
3,
of their work for many years now. And I remember Yoshi P making a statement about how he felt before launch, that Final Fantasy needed to think about the preferences of the younger gamer these days, who are more attuned with faster paced combat games, and I can see the reason behind switching the combat style. Though the recent successful sales of games like Persona 5, Octopath Traveler do show that turn-based JRPGs still have a real appeal to modern-day gamers. So I can also see why there's a discourse and argument about why certain people preferred 16 to be turn-based, but nevertheless I felt credit needs to be given to the dev team for 16 for keeping the old school Final Fantasy fans in mind while they're making this drastic shift to a new combat system. They inherently knew this new combat change might seem daunting to longtime fans, and so the game actually provides features to ease the transition, such as adjustable difficulty settings and generous checkpointing even within boss fights itself. For example, if you wipe on boss phase 2, you don't spawn in phase 1, you actually spawn in phase 2. On top of that, you're given special
I think this is beautiful. The fact that, especially, I think that this game has such long bosses. The fact that you have checkpoint in the middle of a boss phase, I think is very, very important in that game. Like, dying in the second or third phase of a boss would drive me fucking mad and might make me close the game if I didn't have a checkpoint in Final Fantasy 16, because some of the boss battles are like 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Not all of them, but some specific ones, especially the ones that are very story-driven ones. Damn. Some of them really made me tired. When I finished them, I really wanted to rest.
Rings that you can equip that automate certain real-time combat tasks for you, like the auto popping of potions when you are low. 16 also adopts a character action combat style. The new combat action style of 16 is led by the renowned combat designer Ryota Suzuki. And throughout the game, you control Clive in combat, an older brother with his own powers and the ability to control various icons. Clive's combat abilities will evolve throughout the game as the game offers new and different skills and special moves associated with each icon. Now, each icon has a unique skill tree that can be learned and upgraded, providing a wide range of combat options. Clive can equip up to 3 icon toolkits at a time, allowing for seamless switching and experimentation with different abilities. The enemy design is stellar, especially when it comes to boss fights, with well-crafted telegraphs that allows players to react and strategize effectively. The combat system focuses on real-time action, allowing for precise dodges, counters, parries, and devastating combos. The controls are smooth and responsive, and when you time those last-second dodges and parries in a boss fight to the blaring and heart-pounding music, you feel like a badass. Boss encounters in 16 have shown me a whole different visual and emotional experience that I never thought was possible in video game history, let alone in a Final Fantasy franchise. Just when I thought they couldn't top the previous boss battle, like a magician, Yoshi P and team continues to surprise me in the upcoming battles. And I would love to go into the details and specifics here, but respectful that this is a spoiler-free review, so I'll keep my gushing of certain fights to a future video that is not spoiler-free. But know this, each boss fight presents a unique challenge, and the game manages to avoid repetition by introducing new mechanics and variations as the story progresses. These encounters are not only visually stunning, but it also offers a satisfying balance of narrative context, music, and mechanics.
I think the icon fights are not, well, when it comes to being a pro player, like, saying pro player feels very wrong, but I can't deny that bosses like the bosses in Dark Souls and Elden Ring are more pro bosses. And I'm saying it with air quotes because I just don't have any other way to describe it. If fighting an enemy in a video game was an esport, Dark Soul will be at the top. So when it comes to this kind of people who are like very methodical and think about how do I beat the boss in the most smart way and stuff like that, I think that Dark Souls takes it 100%. But when it comes to story-driven bosses, the way that Square mixed fighting, combat, and storytelling, they're so interweaved together in such a beautiful way that I really didn't care. That in the middle of a fight, suddenly you have like a, how do you call this? Action something, I forgot. QT, quick action. In the middle of a fight, you have a QT. Usually, I tended to hate QT, but in Final Fantasy 16, QTs were actually very fun. And it's not the QT itself that was fun for me. It was the fact that the QT was connected to a story. You are fighting an enemy, and while you're fighting an enemy, there is an actual story being unfolded. The relationship between you and the enemy you're fighting against changes, the dynamic, the place that you're fighting at. Things are evolving in front of your eyes in real time. And it felt more like watching a movie, a very good movie, than it was fighting in a video game. It did feel like fighting in a video game, but I think that they hit a beautiful balance between combat and storytelling, and the way they are interwoven, both of them, is brilliant. Some of the boss fights I adored. They were so damn fun to watch. So when it comes to beautiful story integration into game combat, Final Fantasy 16, I'm taking my hat off. My hat off to you in appreciation for the beautiful thing that you have created. You have taken QT to a whole new level and actually made me appreciate QT, because I used to hate QT. You made me actually enjoy QT. But I would never ever want to see something like what Final Fantasy did in a Dark Soul game. That would fucking ruin it to me. I love the fact that I can have two different, completely different feels, completely different. Although both of them are kinda RPG. I don't know if you can consider. Can you consider Dark Souls as an RPG? I'm not sure. I think you can. Action RPG. I don't know. I'm not too well versed in the difference between them, but I love the fact that I can have two different boxes. One box is professional gaming. Professional gaming, which I give to Dark Souls. And the other box is enjoying a gripping and interesting story, which is where Final Fantasy 16 lands. So when I'm fighting a boss in Final Fantasy 16, I do not have the same expectation of professionalism that Dark Souls give me. And I just enjoyed the ride. And boy, that's some amazing ride. Oh my god. That's some amazing ride right there. Just talking about it makes me want to play the game. Alright, let's keep going.
Looking back, the highest of highs of the game lies in these moments of combat that is tied to boss battles and showdowns. However, there are definitely elements of combat that I think is a flaw. Elements of combat that I missed from the previous Final Fantasy titles that I wish they could have included in 16, and this would have gone a long way in augmenting the combat experience. For example, I missed a party system where you can control more than Clive, as well as the ability to tap into more traditional character classes of Final Fantasy like White Mages, Dark Knights, Dragoons. I guess very similar to Final Fantasy Strangers of Paradise. Even the usual concept of elemental weakness that required me to plan for certain fights in Final Fantasy's history is omitted in this combat reiteration.
Dude, I agree with him 100%. I think one of the things that I personally feel makes a Final Fantasy game is classes. Not all Final Fantasy games have classes, and not all Final Fantasy games have such a big variety of classes, but the majority of them do. And I think that the choice of how you fight is part of what makes Final Fantasy game a Final Fantasy game. Having the white mage and the black mage and the dragoon, and the warrior. What else? There are so many of them, but they don't come to mind. Gunbreaker. There are too many of them. Archer, dancer. There are so many of them. Machinist. I can keep on thinking, and names will keep popping out. I think that some of the charm, some of the beauty of what makes a Final Fantasy game a Final Fantasy game. And actually, I don't feel salty with Square deciding to not do that in that Final Fantasy game, because I think they did the right thing not including it. I think if you were to include it, it would take away from the story immersion. I don't know how would you implement a system that you can have so many jobs without making the character less relevant. Yeah. So actually, I think Square was smart not implementing the job system into that game. I wonder if originally they planned doing it and they removed it in the last minute, not in the last minute, but during the development, or if they didn't want to have the job system from the beginning. But although I think that the job system is part of what makes a Final Fantasy game a Final Fantasy game, it was alright not being included. And maybe it was even the right choice for them not to include it.
Duration. But by far the biggest weakness of the entire combat system is tied to gearing and equipment. In 16, it
True.
felt very arbitrary and it was lacking in depth. The game limits players' controls over their character stats, favoring a more user-friendly guided experience tied to the story progression. The leveling system offers stat boosts that cannot be allocated by the players. The gear and accessory slots provide minimal stat increases, and the weapons of Clive, which could have offered unique abilities or elemental alignments similar to previous Final Fantasy titles, only offered marginal damage upgrades. The gear upgrades often feel underwhelming, with minimal changes in stats that fail to create a sense of progression. It tends to be something like, oh, here's a new sword with plus 10 more attack and 10 more stagger, or here is a new chest piece that has more health. It's very linear and it doesn't leave much for room of experimentation of different builds. Overall though, the combat is extremely visually appealing and offers satisfying abilities and combos to execute, but I felt the lack of greater mechanical depth was a flaw in terms of how the combat was brought out in the game, and that could have been the icing on the cake that will make the combat a way more enjoyable experience in the game. Though perhaps, given this is a big shift in combat philosophy in 16, the dev team perhaps decided not to make it overly complicated since they are appealing to old and new players alike, so maybe we'll see more complexity in 17, time will tell. Moving on from combat, I'd like to talk about Valistia, the world that 16 is based in. The devs have definitely succeeded in creating a fascinating world, a highly political world that is divided into kingdoms, each ruled by different factions with their unique architecture, faiths, and belief systems. The dominant characters who can summon powerful deities known as icons hold significant power and influence. The game explores the tension and delicate balance between nations and their icons, as well as the consequences of using these powerful beings. And then you have these giant mother crystals that are sticking out of the ground, massive formations that provide the world with magical energy, and they seem to be failing, leading to a blight that shrinks kingdoms and heightens tensions amongst them. The graphical fidelity of what I've just described in the world of 16 is impressive, particularly in the environments and character design. The level of details in castles, structures, and character clothing is noteworthy. The game features stunning vistas and unique settings that further immerses players in the world of Valistia. The visual storytelling throughout the entire game is masterfully executed, even with minor details reflecting the ongoing events and the reaction of the local citizens. The game's organic environments, including the lush forest and majestic landscapes, all beautifully rendered. However, speaking about the world, unlike previous entries in the series, 16 is not an open world game, and while the game features stunning and detailed locations, the areas available for exploration are relatively small. Most locations are linear, offering limited off-the-path exploration, and a lack of variety in terms of types of monsters and the abilities they execute further hampers this issue. The game's focus on linear gameplay, whereby you're not allowed to roam in the open world, and instead you have to choose certain checkpoints on the map to teleport.
Dude, you're wrong. You are allowed to roam. Yes, the game is linear. Yes, the maps are relatively small. But in that small area of the map, you are allowed to roam. Not only you're allowed to roam, you are even... they even try to give you a reason to roam, mostly because of the side quests. And although there are not a lot of them, I won't say there are a lot of them, there are hidden chests everywhere. So they do try to do their best to give you some reason to roam within the small areas that are available, and especially in some parts of the maps, like the desert and the forest areas and stuff like that. You do have some hidden treasures here and there that you can uncover if you look enough. So they do want you to roam. The the places are not big relatively to an open world game. They are not. But I think for a game who from the beginning decided not to go the open world route, they have done beautiful work. And yeah.
Part 2 to advance the story further emphasizes the departure from traditional Final Fantasy titles, and that might not be everyone's cup of tea. Now, we have spoken about story, combat, and the world, all of which heavily involves the use of cutscenes to convey most of the stories and fights. Now, as a fan of Final Fantasy XIV, whenever I see the warning that there are cutscenes ahead, I instantly drop my controller and excitedly dash off to grab a drink because I know something big is coming on the horizon, and I prepare for those jaw-dropping moments just like how I prepare for a movie. The way they have integrated cutscenes in 16 is really commendable. There's a seamless transition between gameplay and cutscenes with minimal loading times, and this applies to both within combat and out of combat. But there's a downside to this as well. Because the game cutscenes are such a treat from a storytelling perspective, it feels like the game story advances at a glacial pace during the more gameplay-oriented moments of the game, where you get to control Clive and move around. It's common to get main story quest lines where you have to go here and talk to 3 strangers or go to these 2 spots on the map to investigate something. Very reminiscent to the 14 MMO experience, which I'm not quite sure I like in a single player title. Because of this, I feel like the game finds it tricky to balance between gameplay and storytelling. It often leaves players with brief bursts of gameplay followed by lengthy cutscenes. And this creates a very polarizing experience where the highs of the game are mind-blowing in a I can't believe this is happening manner that is followed by the low points that is filled with the more mundane main story task. But if there's any part of the game that I feel is absolutely impeccable and flawless, it has to be the music and the soundtrack of 16. And are we surprised given that Sokan is at the helm leading the charge here? The modern day
Dude, what is he talking about? I think that at least the Final Fantasies that I have played by far, the story always take the front row in the game. Final Fantasy, I won't say all of them because there are too many games that I still haven't played, but the ones that I did, 7 Remake, I played some 13. 14, I completed 14 completely. 16, 15. The story takes the front row. Story is the biggest part of a Final Fantasy game. I don't think that if you are the type of person who doesn't like watching cutscenes, maybe Final Fantasy is not for you. And this is okay. There are plenty of games that have very minimal amount of cutscenes and story in them, and you can play them. But I think that for a person who doesn't like story, Final Fantasy might not be the game for them. And this is fine. And I think that when it comes to Final Fantasy 16, they decided to go... how do you say that? They decided to drop all of their chips on the story. And there are some places when the story is very long. I don't know, maybe 10, 15 minutes or stuff like that. You have like a very, very long cutscenes. And it's like watching a movie to some degree. And yeah, I don't think this is wrong. And I think they have done a great job about that. There's nothing wrong about that. And I also think that the fact that whenever you press the pause button, it doesn't like skip the story. When I first when I played the game, I for the longest amount of time I was too afraid to press the pause button while I was watching a cutscene. Because usually in video games, whenever you press the pause button while watching a cutscene, it jump the cutscene. And I just enjoyed the story of Final Fantasy so much, and I was too afraid to actually misclick and like jump a cutscene. But eventually, I was brave enough, and I decided to press the button, and I saw that it actually pauses the cutscene. So you need to be very you need really bad to jump a cutscene in order to do that. You can't do it by accident. It's very, very hard to do it by accident. And I think this is also one of the small little nuggets that show you how much Final Fantasy 16, how much Square are proud of having a story-driven game. To that degree that they actually make it hard for the player to skip it. It's not impossible. You can do it, and they explicitly tell you how to skip it, but they try to do their best to make it impossible to accidentally skip it, which I think is a point to show how much they are proud of their story. And they should be. It's a very, very well-crafted story.
Mozart seems to be flexing on us in 16, showing off his mastery and wide repertoire of using different musical genres in a video game. Epic orchestral and choir tracks are complex with multitudes of layers. There are somber strings that are used in certain scenes to add a dash of tragedy, which is very fitting for the darkest and grittiest Final Fantasy ever made. It's from little details like that that shows Soken's dedication to crafting an epic set of soundtracks that conveys emotions and narrative themes with precision. One of my favorite boss fights in the game is backed by a D&B track, also known as drum and bass, which as you can imagine has an intense tempo that characterizes the frenetic pace of the fight, which I can assure you only adds to the cold sweat on my feet as I dodged and parried ability after ability. Another sign of his mastery of using music to supplement storytelling lies in the tracks tied to the different nations of Valisthea. Considering that 16 revolves around the conflicts of these nations, Soken has gone to the extent of featuring distinctively different themes that represents each nation. And it's clear that these carefully crafted themes hold deep, meaningful connections to players, and they represent the characters' origins and the land they represent. Again, no surprise from the man who showed us he can infuse soundtracks with emotional depth and storytelling across his various masterpieces, especially when it comes to his soundtrack related to 14. And though Soken is not afraid to experiment with music in 16, it's clear he also made special care to pay homage to previous games in the series. Just listen to the prelude song on the title screen. That soundtrack just yells crystals in my mind's eyes for some reason. It is tributes like that that showcases Soken's ability for his predecessors, most noteworthy of all Nobuo Uematsu, and it adds an extra layer of enjoyment for long-time fans of the Final Fantasy franchise. As a fan of 14 though, I also noticed influences from Soken's previous works in the soundtrack of 16. For example, there's a certain Kingdom's OST that heavily reminded me of Heavensward's soundtrack in 14, and I guess not coincidentally, dragons do play a massive role in that particular nation's backstory. Over 200 pieces of music and 8-hour-long soundtrack, you will see why 16 soundtrack is a testament to Soken's musical prowess and his ability to create a diverse and emotionally impactful score. Through genre variety, meaningful melodies, leitmotifs, Soken weaves a tapestry of music that enriches the game's narratives and captivates players. He absolutely knocked it out of the park, 10 out of 10 in the department of musical scores for me, the only flawless component of this entire review for me. Now let's tackle a hairier issue in 16, the side quest, which has definitely led to mixed reactions and opinions. From my view, the side quest starts off with low stakes and they are really mundane. For example, the first side quest that you unlock...
Yo, that's true. That's true. The first side quests in the game, they are very boring. But the more you advance into the story, the higher the quality of the side quests become. Not all the side quests, but more and more side quests are starting to feel almost, not exactly, but close to the level of a main quest. When it comes to complexity of the story, that is. The first side quests are very typical game side quests. Other game side quests. Low quality.
Log is to serve soup to 3 random people in a tavern that have no
Yeah, I
implications
remember.
of whatsoever on the story. But towards the end game, the side
But even though this is a very stupid side quest, I must say that every person that you serve the soup to tells you a little bit about his experience. And because this is the beginning of the game, I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say the majority of people here, this is the hideaway. The majority of people in the hideaway are previous bearers who used to be enslaved, and they finally got released into the hideaway, in which they experience for the first time how it feels to be a free man and woman. So I think that you serving them the soup, after you serve every one of them the soup, they tell you a little bit about how they feel and what they experienced recently in their life. And I think that this is a teeny tiny small way of telling you a story and making the characters and the world rounder, making you understand it to a bigger level. So I think that even though the side quest itself is stupid, there is story interwoven into bits, small nuggets of story integrated into the side quest that actually tell you about the world that you are currently experiencing. So I think they've done a great job at this. And before I actually served the soup to those guys, I was, oh my god, are you fucking me? Are you going to give me a quest that I need to take stuff and bring them to some random dude that I don't care about? But actually, when I served them the soup and they are actually told me a little bit about their experience, I actually appreciated the fact that they decided to create the side quest. Not that I enjoyed the side quest, but I enjoyed the story interwoven into the side quest.
side quest progressively becomes more thought-provoking, strengthening the relationships between the main character and providing a deeper connection to the world.
Here we
In
go.
fact, towards endgame, there's a couple of side quests that I would deem as a must-do, as they are instrumental in helping you have a deeper appreciation of the ending. Even
Thank you.
seemingly forgettable characters receive unexpected focus, adding depth and richness to the overall narrative of the main story if you do bother to complete the side quest. But herein lies the controversy. If the early side quest in the game seems to be mundane and way less impactful, how are players supposed to discern between the side quests that they deem truly worth their time because it has a direct impact to the story versus those that have a way lower impact? I wouldn't blame people for thinking that the majority of the side quests feels like filler content, especially because it starts off like that in the first few side quests that you
It
unlock.
does.
The sheer quantity of lackluster quests diminishes the overall experience, and it becomes quite a task to identify the worthwhile ones. Objectives may seem repetitive at times. Go here, find this spot, investigate this, talk to this person, fetch some items, you get the point. Similarly, the renown system, which rewards players for completing side quests and bounties, often offers unremarkable resources that do not generate any form of fulfillment or excitement.
True.
The occasional valuable rewards are overshadowed by the abundance of crafting materials that I already have a ton of and could be easily acquired somewhere else. So this lack of meaningful incentives to progress renown reinforces the notion that these systems were added to fulfill a checklist rather than to provide a compelling gameplay element. I do struggle with expressing my views about the side quest though, because The fact that it's named a side quest means that it should be purely optional. No one is forcing you to do what you deem are mundane quests. But I cannot help but wonder if they have reduced the amount of side quests in the game, only keeping the ones that are instrumental in lending color and layers to the main story, so that players know from the get-go that these side stories are worth investing time into. Maybe that could have been a better outcome, and maybe the entire side quest experience will be much more well received. Now, speaking about side quests, it's worth mentioning that 16 also offers a unique experience that may appeal to players on more subsequent playthroughs. The new Game Plus mode alongside the Final Fantasy mode presents brand new additional challenges for those seeking more intense and punishing encounters in their subsequent playthrough. The ability to merge items obtained in subsequent playthroughs enhances replayability, and though the focus is on combat, there are still ample opportunities for completionists and collectors. Treasure chests, monster hunts, they all offer replay value. But wrapping up though, there's something that remains absolutely crystal clear in my mind. It is important to note that personal opinions will differ about the topics that I've covered in this video, but it's clear to me if someone asked me if they should try out 16, I would respond with a resounding yes without
Of
any
course.
of a doubt, especially if they are keen in the franchise or they remotely are interested in Final Fantasy. Despite all the flaws I mentioned, this game definitely resonates with Final Fantasy fans via its spectacular icon battles and the impressive presentation through more character development, riveting soundtracks and cinematics that rival those of big budget blockbusters. And having slept on it for a few days after beating the game, I think this best sums up my take on 16. Similar to Clive having to forge forward in difficult times, 16 represents forging ahead with the more storied Final Fantasy franchise. By embracing action-based gameplay and delivering a much darker and mature narrative, the game offers a fresh and engaging experience. Yoshi P and CBU3 have demonstrated their commitment to pushing the boundaries of the series, and I think this bodes well for Final Fantasy 17. The overall journey has been gripping, and I already miss the adrenaline-pumping moments of progressing through the main story quest. A must-play if you're remotely interested in Final Fantasy, though I cannot help but wonder if they had time or the budget to fix all the flaws I've highlighted in this beautiful title. Maybe this could have been an absolute monster of a title, the true magnum opus of the Final Fantasy franchise. And that is my honest opinion of 16. If you enjoyed the video, do subscribe to the channel. More of the more spoilery video related to...
Oh man, Quazii, you have done an amazing job of reviewing Final Fantasy 16. It's so well thought of review that it was very hard to find any points of disagreement. And even when I had points of disagreement, it wasn't 100% disagreement. It was like a smidge of disagreement. The way you review the game is so good. Just amazing review. So yeah. I don't believe Quazii only have 65k subscribers. Dude, I thought he had like 500k or 1 mil or something like that, but I have a feeling that he will get there. He will get there eventually. Such a good guy. I don't know how to describe it. It's beautiful. So yeah. Quazii, he deserves to be subscribed to, liked, and all the other stuff. And yeah, it was great going through my experience, through his experience of the game. Tipping my hat off for him. Good job. All right, I think that will be it for now. I'm thinking maybe I would play today later on. I'm not sure yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I will switch to Final Fantasy 16. I'm so close to the end of the game, but I have a feeling that the ending is going to be long. So I need all the mental power that I can muster for it. But we'll get there eventually. I let the juices marinate in my head of my current experience with the game for the last 2 weeks or so. Alright, so I think that will be the end for now. Thank you everybody for watching the stream, and I'll see you next time. Have a lovely day or night. Bye bye.